I never thought silence could carry the weight of a door closing. Joanna Green's email arrived sometime after noon, tucked between a museum newsletter and an automated notice about a package delivery. She'd written, "Are you coming to your dad's anniversary party? I heard it's going to be quite the event." I stared at it longer than I should have, not because I was unsure of my answer, but because I didn't know how to respond to something I hadn't been invited to. The subject line didn't sting. The message didn't shock me. It was the assumption so casual, so natural that I was already in the loop. I opened my father's old email account, the one we used to share for family notices back when things were simpler, or at least more coordinated. Password, Whitmore 1937, still unchanged. In the inbox was a forwarded invitation from Margot, his wife of 12 years, formerly his financial advisor, titled Celebrating 40 Years of Love. It was a lie before I even opened the attachment. The seating chart was color-coded. My name wasn't there. Will was at table 1 next to Margot's sister, my father's business partner, 2 former neighbors, a couple from his church. Even the florist had a name tag, but not me. I scrolled once, scrolled again. Still nothing. No oversight. Just absence. I closed the tab, went back to the kitchen. The teacup from breakfast was still where I left it, half full, with a ring of dried green on the rim. I poured it down the sink. The water didn't run warm. I opened the family group text, something I'd muted months ago. No one had mentioned the party, only a string of planning logistics, seating orders, menu updates, floral preferences. Margot's messages ended in exclamation points. Will's were one-word approvals. No one thought to ask, "What about Iris?" I wasn't angry. That would have required surprise. That evening around 8:30, the phone rang. I watched it ring 3 times before answering. The screen read Dad. His voice came through crisp, clean, unhesitating. "You don't need to come. It's already been decided. No explanation. No context. Not even a hello." I held the phone to my ear a little longer after he hung up. The screen turned black. My reflection stared back, flat hair, pale lips, a faint smudge of graphite on my wrist from sketching. I left the phone face down on the counter. I didn't pick it up again until morning. Later that night, I opened the top drawer of my desk. Tucked underneath a stack of linen stationery was a small envelope, cream-colored, unmarked. Inside was a place card from the last family event I'd attended, Iris Walker, table 3. The ink had started to fade. The edge was bent. Someone had spilled wine on the corner. I had kept it anyway. The drawer closed more slowly than I meant. Somewhere between those 2 moments, the phone call and the drawer closing, I understood something had shifted. Not loudly, not with drama, just enough to never go back. The next morning, I met Joanna at the corner cafe. She smiled as if nothing was wrong. "I was hoping to see you there," she said, stirring her coffee. "Your father looked so proud in the announcement photos." I nodded. My own cup remained untouched. The sleeve on it had a tiny tear near the seam. "I hadn't heard about it," I said, watching the sugar dissolve into her drink. Her expression faltered just enough to register. "I assumed they would have—" She didn't finish. We sat in that pause longer than either of us wanted. "It's okay," I offered, though I wasn't sure for whom. "You know," she said quietly, "your mother would have made sure you had the best seat." I didn't reply. I looked down instead. A small crack had formed in the ceramic saucer. It hadn't been there the last time we met. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled the storage box from under my bed, the one with old photos, tax papers, a necklace with a broken clasp. At the bottom was a birthday card from 3 years ago. Margot had signed it, warmly. Margot. No title, no affection, just a signature like a vendor closing a transaction. Inside the envelope was a sticky note from Will. Hope you're still doing your art stuff. Margot says there's a gallery opening in town. Maybe try something more practical that year. I'd just finished restoring a 19th century map collection for the State Archive. No one had asked about it. I placed the note back inside. The envelope didn't close all the way anymore. There was no confrontation, no apology. Just a growing quiet that stretched between us like a locked room no one wanted to enter, and somewhere in that space they rearranged the chairs, moved the names folded, the cards, redrew the table, and simply forgot to include mine. Or maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they remembered exactly who I was and decided that was reason enough not to ask me back. Either way, I no longer waited for an explanation. I just let the seat remain empty. I thought if I took up less space, I would fit in better. It started with the dishes, not the act itself. Anyone can rinse a plate, but the rhythm of it. The small sound of porcelain touching porcelain, the careful stacking, the quiet exit from the table before anyone asked me to. I stayed behind after dinners sometimes, without being noticed, sometimes with a passing glance from Margot as she dabbed at her lipstick in the hallway mirror. "You're very tidy," she once observed, folding her napkin without looking at me. "It's good not to expect applause for basic effort." I nodded. Later that evening, I left a lemon tart on the counter. She liked lemon. I knew this because she'd once criticized the store-bought one Will had brought, muttering something about artificial zest. The next morning, it was gone. No note. No comment. Just the plate, rinsed and left upside down in the drying rack, a single yellow crumb still clinging to the ceramic lip. I had folded so many corners of myself down by then that I didn't know which edge I was standing on. I wore the same muted sweaters. I stopped bringing home materials from the museum. The linen bag I once carried was replaced by a plainer one, something you wouldn't notice even if you tried. In the winter, I skipped breakfast to avoid the kitchen. Margot didn't like the smell of hot cereal. In the spring, I stayed out later after work, wandering aisles of grocery stores without buying anything. The produce section became my favorite place to waste time. Everything smelled clean and impersonal. The apples didn't care who picked them. Will once asked offhandedly, "Are you still at that gallery, or are you doing something more permanent now?" I answered without looking up, "Still at the gallery." He didn't respond. Another time, Margot touched the hem of my coat and lifted it slightly, as if checking a label. Some fabrics wrinkle, no matter how well you take care of them. She walked away before I could react. I kept wearing the coat, but only on weekdays. My father remained mostly silent through these moments. He didn't correct them. He didn't defend me. What he did do one evening while washing his hands in the downstairs sink was glance toward me and offer, "You've always known how to stay out of the way. That's something to be appreciated." I thought it was a compliment. I memorized the exact cadence of it even. Replayed it like music that almost made sense. I remember placing his cufflinks back in the wooden tray afterward, carefully rotated so the initials faced up. It wasn't until later, much later, that I realized he wasn't praising anything. He was thanking me for being convenient. Every Sunday, the three of us sat at the long table. Not always for meals, sometimes for bills, tax folders, schedules. Margot preferred order in all things. She once drew a floor plan for holiday seating so no one would feel visually congested. She never placed me near the window. During one of those afternoons, I caught her flipping through one of my sketchbooks. I had left it on the edge of the hall table by mistake. She turned a page, paused, then closed it and slid it toward the edge. Your drawings have a sincerity to them, she said, though I imagine the market for that kind of thing is limited. I didn't take the book back right away. I left it there for 2 days just to see if anyone else would touch it. They didn't. I remember helping organize the pantry once. Margot liked rows of cans sorted by color. Tomato soup didn't belong next to lentils. Broth should be shelved in multiples of 2. I spent hours that evening lining up labels to face front. My reward was silence. No criticism, no complaint, no proof I'd been there at all. The next morning, the top shelf had been rearranged again. That's when I stopped baking. There was something about mixing sugar into butter that made the silence feel louder. On my 29th birthday, my father forgot, or pretended to. I came home from work changed into my inside sweater, the faded one with a fraying cuff, and found him in the den watching an old western. I didn't know you were still doing that museum work, he muttered during a commercial. You could probably be doing something more structured by now. I folded my arms. It's meaningful to me. His eyes didn't leave the screen. Meaningful doesn't pay for much. That night, I wrapped the small painting I had been restoring in brown paper and placed it in my closet. I didn't finish it. I was not excluded with cruelty. That would have given it shape, something I could argue against. Instead, I was edited out in layers, small, polite omissions that made no sound as they stacked, and I allowed it. Willingly, even. I matched their tone, mirrored their indifference, learned to smile when I was overlooked because it was easier than asking why, but I think somewhere beneath it, I believed that being agreeable would make me necessary. It didn't. Now, when I walk through a room and no one looks up, I don't wonder what I did wrong. I just count how many times I chose to stay. I don't remember when I stopped expecting my name to be said out loud. The wedding invitation arrived on textured cream paper, sealed with a monogram that didn't belong to me. Robert and Margot Whitmore, it read in cursive gold. Below, in smaller print, with their beloved son, William. No daughter, no Iris, no trace. It sat on the hall table for a week, before Margot moved it to the china cabinet. I never saw it again after that. They had a photographer at the ceremony, someone Margot knew from a gallery opening. In the framed photo that hung in the dining room later, my father stood between Margot and Will, both smiling in that way people do when they believe the image will outlast the moment. The photo never included me. I had taken it after all. At the time I didn't mention the omission. It didn't seem worth noting. I helped pour champagne-wiped fingerprints from the dessert forks, took the trash out when the bin filled too quickly. I left before the final toast said goodbye to no one. That was the pattern then, leave before anyone notices. Months after the wedding, the local paper published a small feature in the Sunday section. A piece I'd restored, a 1784 wood engraving of a coastal boundary dispute, had been acquired by the Historical Archive. My name appeared in the byline, Conservation and Repair, by Iris Walker, MFA trained specialist. The reporter had interviewed me in a corner of the archive's back office surrounded by flattened parchment and acid-free tissue. I clipped the article. Not because I needed a record, but because I thought maybe someone at home might say something. They didn't. The paper had been left open on the kitchen counter that morning. Not deliberately. Just left. Margot moved it aside while reorganizing the spice rack. My father walked past it 3 times without pausing. At dinner, Will discussed a new portfolio client. Margot complimented his tie. I folded my napkin in quarters and placed it beside my plate before anyone had finished eating. There was a birthday party for Margot that spring. She liked themed gatherings. That year it was blue and silver, napkins, centerpieces, even the candles on her cake. Will brought a necklace in a velvet box. She unwrapped it slowly, then glanced across the table at me. "You're still working at that little gallery, right? What was it you do again? Framing things or maybe taping them to walls?" She didn't wait for an answer. Her attention shifted to the next gift. I returned to the kitchen, where the dishwasher was humming low and steady. I dried my hands on the dish towel, the one with the faint bleach mark in the corner. The cloth held no scent, not even warmth. That night, I paused outside the study. The door was cracked. My father's voice filtered through in a tone I hadn't heard directed at me in years. Calm, confident, unburdened. "She's never quite belonged," he said. "Even as a child, always floating around, sketching in corners. Never fit the mold." There was a pause, then the sound of a glass being set down. "She's not built for this kind of life," he continued. "Margot understands that." I stepped back before I heard the rest. The carpet beneath my feet muffled the movement. No one noticed I wasn't in the room. I went to bed without brushing my hair. The brush stayed on the nightstand for 3 days. In a drawer I rarely opened, I kept a ring. It was my mother's plain silver, a soft dent on one side where she'd gripped it too tightly during an argument once. I never knew the details. She wore it even after the divorce, said it reminded her of her hands when they were still certain. Margot never asked about it. Neither did my father. I wore it once briefly during a family dinner. Will glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you were sentimental?" I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. There are spaces in memory where sound should live but doesn't, where names should be spoken but remain untouched. I've come to recognize those places. They sit quietly between gestures, between the refill of a glass and the clearing of a plate, between the adjustment of a chair and the sigh that follows. They are filled with what people choose not to say. And sometimes that choice is louder than speech. When I think back on those moments, I don't remember who stood where or what was served. I remember the weight of things left out, the space at the end of a sentence where my name never landed, the glance that slid past me as if I were air rearranged into the shape of a daughter. Some erasures come in red ink, others come in silence. Mine came in folded napkins, mispronounced rolls, blank stares, and silver candles no one asked me to light. And when I left the room, the silence stayed seated. I used to believe that things left unsaid couldn't hurt as much as the ones spoken out loud. That was before I learned how quiet ink could be. Joanna sent the envelope by hand, not with a stamp or a card, just a folded set of papers slipped under my door with a note in her handwriting. "I thought you should see this." No greeting, no explanation. The letterhead was clean, expensive, a local firm I didn't recognize. At the top, in bold transfer of property, Walker Family Cabin, Middlebury, VT. I flipped through the pages slowly, even though I knew what I was looking for. The line for my mother's name was there, the co-owner, the woman who had planted hydrangeas along the back wall and refinished the floor with her bare hands. Under heirs or estate representatives, there was a phrase typed neatly into the form. Successor, not designated, not forgotten, just not chosen. The new title listed 2 names, Robert Walker and William Walker. A third name had been added in handwriting at the bottom, small and exact. Margot Ellison Walker. I sat on the edge of my bed with the paper resting on my lap. It didn't weigh much. Paper never does. But I felt something in my spine shift, like I'd been carrying a frame that finally gave out. I hadn't been to the cabin in years. Last I saw it, the shutters needed repainting, and the front step groaned if you leaned too far left. My mother's quilt was still folded over the couch then, and there was a jar of sea glass beside the window. I never asked if they kept it. They didn't need to. I called my father. His voice was even deliberate, the tone he used when discussing insurance deductibles or tax season. You never expressed interest in the property. And it needs work. Margot and Will are better positioned to handle it. There was no pause, no space for breath. She's been talking about having a quiet space to retreat, somewhere with nature. You've never been one for that kind of thing. I traced the edge of the envelope with my thumbnail, careful not to tear it. I just thought, he cut me off. Not harshly, not loudly. Just enough. You're the kind of person who lives in memory, not in maintenance. And that place, well, it requires a kind of presence you've never been drawn to. He hung up before I replied. I held the phone a little too tightly, felt the sharp corner of its case against my palm. When I set it down, there was a faint red imprint where it had pressed into my skin. The next day I stood in front of the filing cabinet in the corner of the library at work. One drawer stuck slightly when pulled. Inside was a folder labeled Historic Residences, Donor Files. I opened it and stared at the blank forms I had helped prepare for other families, people who wanted their homes remembered, preserved, named after someone who once cooked in their kitchens. I had helped strangers build their legacies, while my own was being quietly disassembled. Will sent me a text that night. No greeting, just a line. We're meeting with the renovation team next weekend. Margot's ordering reclaimed wood. She wants it to feel authentic. No mention of the transfer. No acknowledgement of my absence. I didn't respond. I went through my mother's recipe tin later that week. She had written her notes in blue ink, always on index cards with faint green lines. One card tucked behind blackberry cobbler had the words, "Cabin pantry check expiration dates," scrawled in the corner. I held that card for a long time, not because I planned to use it, but because it proved she had existed in that space, made lists, stocked shelves, imagined seasons. Now her name had been erased in legal font, replaced by someone who couldn't tell a pie crust from plaster. My father once told me after a silent dinner with too much tension and too little salt, "You've always preferred the things no one else notices." At the time I nodded. I thought it meant I had a quiet strength. Now I wonder if it simply made me easy to ignore. There's a file box in the corner of my closet, labeled Archive. Personal. I keep things there I can't explain the need for. A dried maple leaf from a childhood hike, a guest list from a party I didn't attend, the key to a front door I no longer have access to. I added the property transfer papers to it. Uncreased, unsigned, untouched. Not because I wanted to keep them, but because I needed to remember that something had in fact been taken. Not by accident, not by force, but by quiet removal, the kind of taking that pretends not to be. Some absences aren't announced, they simply unfold. I packed in silence, not because there was anything to hide, but because the silence had already been there for months, maybe longer. I didn't take much. Most of what I owned had been acquired without intention, things that had filled the space, not claimed it. A few books, 2 sweaters I wore on rotation, the chipped mug I preferred over the matching set Margot kept pristine in the cabinet. I left the more expensive things. The wool coat my father gave me that I never wore, still hanging with the price tag slipped into the inside pocket. The gold pendant from Will's fiancée, a Christmas gift with a note that read, "For something simple, the desk organizer Margot bought during a home order phase that she said made the hallway more cohesive. I took 3 things that didn't serve a function. My mother's red scarf frayed at both ends, a small sketchbook with pressed leaves between pages, and her old brass seal, the kind used for wax stamps. It bore her initials faded but still traceable by thumb. The key I placed in the ceramic bowl by the stove. No note, no farewell, just the same quiet I'd learned to carry with me. They were out of town that weekend, a financial conference Margot had mentioned casually over breakfast 2 weeks before. We'll be back Sunday. Try not to rearrange anything while we're gone. She laughed, but not to me. I had nodded. I nodded often in that house. It cost less than speaking. The moving process took under 2 hours, fewer if you count only the time spent deciding. Most of it was already decided. The taxi driver didn't ask questions when I loaded the boxes. He looked at the address I'd given him and nodded once. The apartment was on the 2nd floor of an old Victorian near the historical district. The stairs creaked at the edges. The window frame stuck. The light was gentle in the afternoons and angled just enough to make shadows across the floor. The woman downstairs ran a bookstore that never seemed to open. She wore oversized cardigans and called me Walker without asking if I preferred my first name. I didn't correct her. That first night, I ate standing up near the radiator. Canned soup, a piece of bread water from the tap. I used the mug with the thin crack, the one I'd packed in newspaper to keep from breaking. It held just enough. 2 days later, I found the photograph. It had slipped between the pages of a dictionary I hadn't opened in years. A family picture taken after a community picnic, one of those casual snapshots someone else took and sent later. My father in the center, Margot beside him, Will on the other side holding a plate with one hand and a drink with the other. I stood slightly behind them, a half step out of frame. The photo had faded. My outline was still visible, but the light had thinned it out. The sun had touched only one side, and it happened to be the one where I stood. I ran my finger over the paper, then placed it inside the drawer beside a box of receipts and a jar of paper clips. I didn't tape it to the wall. Some images are clearer when you don't look at them directly. Will sent a message that week. Margot noticed the key. She says she hopes you took what you needed. Dad wants to know if you're coming back for your coat. I didn't reply. The museum sent me a temporary cataloguing assignment. Nothing formal, just a handwritten note in the margin of a staff bulletin, could use your eyes on the 1870s folios. I accepted without answering. Most mornings I walked to the museum along a path that cut through a narrow alley of bakeries and antique shops. One window always displayed old fountain pens behind glass. I paused once, counted them 11. None the same. All lined up as if they had something left to write. No one called. No one stopped by. Not out of cruelty. Just habit. People forget those who don't require remembering. One afternoon I passed my father on Main Street. He came out of the pharmacy holding a bag with the top folded over twice. He didn't see me. His coat was too large, the collar turned wrong. For a moment, I thought of fixing it. Then I stepped behind the newsstand and waited until he turned the corner. That night, I boiled water slowly, measured out loose tea into the metal strainer my mother once used on Sundays. I drank it on the floor, leaning against the bed frame, watching the brass seal catch the last of the window light. I heard a knock once, not loud, not persistent. I didn't answer. Silence has its own kind of gravity. Once it settles, breaking it feels like a disruption. I've learned how to keep it intact. I never changed my number. I didn't need to. The calls had already stopped before I left. The mailbox stayed empty except for the catalogues that addressed me as resident. There was something oddly fitting about that. Occupant. Temporary. Not permanent enough to personalize. The neighbors never asked my name. The bookstore woman waved once, then went back to stacking books no one would buy. That was the kind of acknowledgement I could hold in my hands. Some departures are thunderclaps. Mine wasn't. I left through a door that didn't close behind me. No one stood at the threshold. No footsteps followed. And when I looked back, just once, from the sidewalk across the street, there was nothing in the window. No light, no movement, just a house that no longer counted me as part of its furniture. I turned away before the silence gave me permission to linger. Not because I needed to prove I was gone, but because this time I didn't need to be invited to leave. Some things sound louder once no one's watching you listen. The floor creaks at the same 3 boards every morning when I cross to the stove. I don't fix them. I've started placing my feet there on purpose just to hear something respond to where I am. It's a small room, but I use all of it now. The window opens stiffly, the hinge catching on a rusted groove halfway through. I push anyway. The bougainvillea outside leans in without asking. There's a table meant for 2, but set for 1. I leave the second chair unoccupied, not out of sorrow, just clarity. No one visits, and I've stopped imagining they will. I use the teapot my mother kept in the linen cabinet, the blue one, with the small chip near the handle. I never saw her use it growing up, just knew she wrapped it each time we moved like it was porcelain instead of ceramic. The crack hasn't spread. I boil water each morning and steep whatever loose leaves I have. No sugar, no milk. Bitterness keeps me awake. I hung the old student prints above the bedworks I made when I thought I had something to say in color and charcoal. They're crooked, but I don't straighten them. There's something honest in the slant. I found the box of old gallery tags I'd meant to throw away 3 apartments ago. They still had my name on them, handwritten in fine black ink. Not printed, not typed. Each one clipped under a title someone else chose. I placed one near the mirror. Not for pride. Just to remember I'd been named in a room once. A letter arrived from the utilities company. The envelope had "To Resident" printed where my name might have been. I opened it, folded it, paid it. No one knows I live here. No one has to. Joanna called once. The number blinked unfamiliar on my phone, but I recognized the pattern. She left a voicemail that began with my name and ended with, "I just wanted to know you were still somewhere." I didn't delete it. I didn't play it again either. There's a difference between vanishing and choosing not to wave. On the 3rd night, I unpacked the last of my things. At the bottom of a cloth bag was a key, small tarnished, still looped with a thread of blue ribbon. My mother used it to lock her cabinet of stored etchings. I never knew what she feared would be taken. Now I wear it on a thin chain. Not for function, just for weight. I write at night. Not full pages, just lines. Sometimes lists. Sometimes the same sentence copied twice. No one knows where I am. But no one needs to know. I don't keep track of dates. I only underline what I want to remember. I passed a neighbor once while taking out the trash. She nodded, then looked down at my boots and said, "Don't see many people around here dressed like they're staying." I smiled without answering. Later that evening, I cleaned the boots with a cloth I'd cut from an old pillowcase. The salt from the street came off easily. The stain at the heel didn't. I left it. The brass seal sits on the bookshelf beside a novel I never finished. I don't polish it. I don't move it. Its initials aren't mine, but I don't mind. Someone once marked envelopes with it. Someone once expected their words to be received. There's comfort in the idea that something made for paper and wax might still matter even when silent. Will texted Dad says you'll change your mind. Margot thinks you'll come home for Thanksgiving. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, then turned it face down and slid it beneath the folded edge of the placemat. The hallway here smells like old laundry and coffee filters. The apartment next door plays jazz in the afternoons. It leaks through the walls just enough to follow the piano. I don't mind it. I hum sometimes quietly when I'm boiling rice or rinsing a dish. Nobody tells me to keep it down. Nobody comments on what I eat, wear, forget. There's no praise either, but that kind of quiet doesn't bruise. The mirror above the sink has a spot in the corner where silver backing peeled away. My reflection distorts there. I brush my hair in front of it anyway. Some mornings I stop and stare just to see what doesn't shift. The towel rack holds one towel. I hang it the way my mother did, folded lengthwise, crease facing in. I haven't cried. Not out of restraint. It just hasn't arrived. Sometimes I think it's like that key only meant for one lock, and once the cabinet is gone, it no longer knows where to turn. I don't think of this as exile. I think of it as absence with edges, a place where I can be a name on nothing, a note on no one's fridge, a story no one rewrites. A place small enough that silence doesn't echo, only settles. And that's enough for now. Silence has a different sound when it follows your name. The email came without warning. No subject line, just my name in the body, and a single question. Hey, just checking in. Is everything okay? Also, Mom's trying to finalize some paperwork on the Vermont cabin. I think a part of it's still under your name. Let us know. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The rhythm belonged to Will, the lowercase mom, the trailing question mark, the tidy assumption that I had something to offer and no history to consider. I read the message 3 times, then opened the old folder with scanned documents I thought I'd never touch again. The auxiliary land deed sat quietly among them, stamped with my mother's name. Not Margot's, not mine. But the bridge was there. I held the corner of the page between 2 fingers, not tightly, just long enough to feel the edge press back. The next morning, the phone rang. I let it buzz until it stopped. It rang again at noon. The number wasn't saved, but the cadence was familiar too, steady to be a stranger, too polished to be a friend. I answered on the 3rd call and didn't speak. The voice came through like a hand gloved in velvet. Iris, darling. I think we've all had time now, haven't we? I didn't respond. She continued. We need to discuss the Vermont property. It's a little tangled, but nothing a good conversation can't fix. We're still family, after all. I placed the phone gently on the table screen down without hanging up. The warmth from my palm remained on the surface longer than expected. Her voice kept going, but I no longer followed the thread. There were no pauses that left space for me to enter. Only paragraphs shaped like offers wrapped in the tone of assumed agreement. Later that day I swept the floor, letting dust collect along the corners. I didn't rush. The broom moved with a rhythm slower than music, but more honest. There was a cup on the windowsill with a faint crack running along its side. I hadn't thrown it out. The line didn't leak, just marked. It reminded me of the Vermont house whole from the outside, but carrying a seam no one mentioned. I replied to Will's email 3 days later. Thanks for checking. I've seen the paperwork. The deed is still valid under Mom's portion. Let me know what needs to be signed and where to send it. No greeting, no closing. Just logistics. He answered within minutes. Great. We really appreciate it. It would mean a lot to Margot to settle this peacefully. She's been under so much stress. It's not easy on any of us. There it was, again, us. As if I were not the line left out, but the punctuation at the end they forgot to erase. The next envelope arrived by courier. Legal letterhead. Thick paper. Margot's name typed above Will's in clean black ink. No room for mine except in the signature box at the bottom. The space left for me wasn't an invitation. It was a blank line to complete their sentence. I held the brass seal in my palm for several minutes that night. It had cooled with the room, but it still bore weight. My mother's initials soft along the curve. I didn't light a candle, didn't melt wax, just set it beside the folded document and left it there. Some stamps aren't for approval. Some are reminders. A week later, I received a voicemail from Margot. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but surely we can be civil. Let's not let old grievances cloud something as practical as real estate. You know what your mother would want. That sentence stayed with me longer than the others, not for what it claimed, but for what it presumed I'd forgotten. When I was 16, my mother once told me, "Some people don't erase you, they overwrite you, and then they expect you to say thank you." I hadn't understood then. I thought she meant neighbours or ex-friends. I didn't know she was trying to prepare me for our own kind. I returned the paperwork unsigned. No note, no explanation. I folded it carefully and used my own envelope. No return address. I don't know what they thought when they opened it. If they called again, I didn't hear it. Sometimes I imagine Margot's voice still hanging in that silence I left her with on the phone. A sentence suspended without anchor, words looking for ground they won't find. I flipped the switch off that night, without turning the light back on. The glow from the hallway bled through the bottom crack in the door, touching the edge of my rug. The same one I'd found at a thrift store frayed on one side, still warm underfoot. I don't need to be missed. I don't need to be thanked. I just don't want to be rewritten. Some changes arrive without applause. The brass hook by the door holds a light grey coat I found at a second-hand shop 3 blocks from the museum. It fits without fuss, doesn't ask for shape or ceremony. I keep a pencil in the inside pocket, one of the thick charcoal kinds with no eraser. I like the weight of it more than its function. Some days I carry it without using it. It's enough to know it's there. I've started walking to the museum earlier than needed. The streets before 9 are quieter, and the cafe on Birch Avenue still smells like old chairs and warm paper. The owner, Matteo, calls me the woman who reads the back of the receipt. I once corrected him. Catalogue, not receipt, but he just smiled and handed me a tea without asking. I never told him which kind I liked. He always gets it right. There was a time when I'd wait for someone to tell me what was fair, what something was worth, whether I could say no. The first time I quoted a price for restoring that 18th century script, I didn't round down. The collector blinked, adjusted her scarf, and nodded. No bargaining, no raised eyebrows. Just a check and a simple, "Send me the invoice." I wrote the amount again at the top of the paper, darker this time. Not because I needed to. I just wanted to see the shape of it in my own handwriting. An invitation arrived last Thursday. Cream card, blue ink, gold trim, too much ornament for something that carried no weight. Family gathering. Hosted by Will and Margot. Casual. Bring photos and stories. I folded it once, not neatly. The crease ran through Margot's name. I didn't mean to aim, but I didn't avoid it either. I wrote a reply on plain stationery. "Thank you. I won't be attending." No apology, no explanation. I signed it simply Iris Walker. I walked it to the corner mailbox myself, dropped it in, didn't look back. There's a drawer in my apartment with unlabeled folders. I've begun cataloguing the pieces my mother collected, small watercolors, sketches of facades not valuable to anyone but her, each with her initials faintly penciled on the back. I index them quietly at night, sometimes with music, sometimes not. I don't intend to publish it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I want the order of it to exist somewhere, even if only in my drawer. A neighbour in the building across asked my name when we passed at the mailbox. Miss or Mrs., she said, smiling but curious. I answered without pausing, just Walker. Some afternoons I sit by the window with the catalogue open, marking things in pencil. I don't press hard. If I change my mind, I want the option to erase. That's the difference now. I mark things for myself, not for their permanence, but for their presence. I received another email from Will last night. The subject line read, "Hope you're well." No mention of land or signatures, just a link to a shared folder of scanned photos from old albums. One had me in it, barely standing at the edge of a birthday scene, holding a paper plate and looking at someone out of frame. My name wasn't in the file title. I closed it without downloading. At the cafe, Matteo handed me a wrapped muffin with the tea. On the house. For the woman who reads everything. I smiled and placed the muffin on the table without unwrapping it. The warmth seeped through the paper. I kept my hand there for a while. I no longer explain my preferences. I don't justify why I don't attend, or answer calls or sign dotted lines mailed without context. My voice doesn't rise. I don't match volume for attention. Silence works finer. There's a new tag on my mailbox. White tape typed letters. I, Walker. That's all. No titles, no suffix, no prefixes to make anyone else comfortable. Just the name I chose to keep. When I peeled the old label off, the glue clung to my fingertips. I didn't scrub it away. Let it fade over time. Someone once told me, when people don't know where to place you, they try to place you behind them. I used to shrink to fit the space they left. Now, I build shelves for what I want to keep. This week, I bought a new set of pencils. Black wood, no brand, just smooth to the touch. I lined them in a tin my mother once used for her brushes. One rolled slightly before settling. I didn't stop it. Let it find its own stillness. I no longer wait for permission. I only wait for tea to cool. And even then, not always. There's a kind of peace in not needing the last word. I wrote the letter in one sitting. No drafts, no revisions. Just a plain sheet, single-spaced, no flourishes. The envelope was recycled a slight bend at one corner. I didn't smooth it. I am not requesting any portion of the Vermont property. I relinquish all legal, familial, or representative ties effective immediately. Please consider this the final correspondence. No signature flourish. Just the initials I use now, simple, unembellished. I, Walker. I walked it to the postbox on 4th and Ash, the one with a narrow slot and a squeaky flap. It took the letter without resistance. No gust of wind followed. No one watched. The forms to change my legal name weren't complicated. The notary asked, dropping a middle name or adding one. I answered, replacing. She nodded. Maternal. I just handed her the form. The space beside new full name held a name no one else had spoken aloud in years. But I had. I wore a plain silver ring to the appointment. It used to belong to my mother, bent slightly at the band from years of work. The imprint on the inside faded. It felt cool and deliberate against my skin. I didn't take it off when I signed. No one replied to the letter. Will's email address bounced back once, and then nothing. No calls, No forwarding mail. My father didn't write. Not a line, not a phrase like the ones he used to favor no. Hope you're well. No! Let's talk like adults. I wasn't waiting. I passed the old house on a Tuesday in October. The shutters were painted green now, not the deep red my mother once insisted on. A car I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. The wind moved the flag above the porch, but I didn't read what it said. I kept walking. 3 blocks down behind the chain-link fence near the edge of the woods, the grass had overgrown where the iris bed used to be. The soil looked dry, but not lifeless. I stopped, knelt, and scattered the seeds I brought in a cloth pouch. No ceremony. Just a handful of potential. My hand left a faint imprint on the dirt where I pressed it down. I didn't stay to see if anything would take root. Some things aren't meant to bloom in front of us. I keep the old family photograph folded now, not torn, not discarded. The crease runs through the center right across the kitchen table where we once sat. My face isn't visible, not because it was erased, but because time has a way of choosing what it fades first. I placed it in the lowest drawer of the desk I refinished myself. A soft pine grain, oiled but imperfect. It sticks slightly when opened. I never fix it. The gallery director asked if I was open to leading a community workshop this winter. Only if you feel like it, she said, handing me the proposed outline. I looked at the calendar she included. No dates conflicted. I said, choose a Saturday. I'll bring the ink. I deleted the family email account last weekend. No backup. No export. When the confirmation screen asked, are you sure I didn't hover? I created a new one, not my full name, just what I use at the museum, for colleagues, for friends, for the person I am now. Margot's voice played once in a voicemail clipped and almost scripted. Iris, we should talk. There are still things to consider, family-wise. I hope you're not being difficult on purpose. I didn't respond. I saved the message under a folder marked unnecessary. There's a small label now on the mailbox outside my apartment. Clear tape, black letters. Walker. No first name, no salutation, no decoration, just enough to say I live here. I've stopped circling events on the calendar out of obligation. I don't mark birthdays I'm not invited to. I don't track estate deadlines that were never mine to meet. The weight of unasked questions doesn't follow me anymore. I no longer draft replies I'll never send. I no longer imagine who might notice if I don't show up. They've stopped expecting me. I've stopped needing them to. A neighbor saw me coming down the stairs with a new frame under my arm. Looks like something special, she said. I told her not special, just finished. I keep the brass seal from my mother's desk on my bookshelf. I haven't used it, but I polish it sometimes with a cloth from the museum gift shop. Not for shine, just so it doesn't forget it was once held with care. I haven't said goodbye. I don't think I will. Some things don't need endings, just a pause long enough to become a boundary. They used to ask if I wanted to be seen. As if visibility were a request one could make politely and not a thing given or withheld without consent. I no longer explain where I've been, or why I live where I do. There's no need to defend the small choices like keeping the curtain drawn just enough for morning light, or how I fold the towels with the stripes hidden inside. This morning the kettle clicked off before I reached the stove. I poured the water slowly, the clay teapot warm under my palm. I let the steam rise. I didn't check my phone. The missed call had come before sunrise. No name, just numbers. I watched the number fade from the screen like condensation vanishing from glass. The tea leaves settled without swirling. I placed the cup beside the exhibition notes and left it untouched. The exhibit catalogue bore my initials in the credits, just I. Walker set in small serif type under archival verification and curatorial annotation. Not bolded, not decorative. No one will stop at that name in a gallery. But I knew which parts I'd preserved. The ink smudges on a map no one else thought authentic, the tiny tear I'd stabilized on a land deed from 1779. The past spoke in brittle paper and uneven lines, and I had learned to listen where others passed over. There was a wind today. It brought the scent of earth and stone from the alley behind the building. A pale iris had bloomed from the pot near my door, half curled still, its petals trembling. I turned back to the table. The letter I never intended to send sat in its envelope, sealed with the copper stamp I'd found again last year, my mother's W, pressed into wax. Inside the single line, no one grants you the right to be real. I didn't sign it. The phone buzzed again, a different number. I flipped it over. Let it ring twice. I let silence answer. That used to feel like avoidance. Now it feels like space. I kept the envelope but moved it to the drawer below the catalogue, placing it beside a strip of negatives from an old roll of film. 3 photos, still legible. A wooden porch, a woman's hands with soil on her fingertips, and a child in a faded red coat. Back turned, arms raised towards something no longer in the frame. No names written on the back. None needed. At noon I stepped out to the bookstore. The air was dry. A loose thread on my sleeve caught on the doorframe, and I paused to pull it free without tearing. The shopkeeper nodded toward a new display of mechanical pencils, but I went to the used shelf, found the jar of charcoal stubs. The label still read, "Pay what feels right." I left a 5. More than needed, less than offered. Back home I shelved a new folio of engravings, portraits no one asked for, but I collected anyway. A woman with a lopsided collar, a boy holding a compass, a sailor with missing teeth. None looked toward the artist. They reminded me of people who knew something and chose not to perform it. When the wind came through the windows, the edges of an old drawing fluttered. I pressed a paperweight over it. A carved stone from the Vermont garden, the one place no one had asked me to leave a mark, and so I had. In the corner of the room, the scarf my mother once wore hung over a chair. Not for use. Just there. Folded with care, a piece of memory that didn't ask to be remembered. I passed by it daily, never picking it up, never ignoring it either. The email account I use now contains no family chain messages, no newsletters from the neighborhood committee my stepmother still chairs, just inquiries from researchers, updates from the museum, and, once in a while, a forwarded poem from Joanna Green, who still signs her notes. For what it's worth, I remember who you are. I never reply. But I don't delete them either. Sometimes I trace her words with the edge of a spoon, just to feel something real pressing back. The tea had cooled. I drank it anyway. Afternoon folded into itself. A neighbor's cat crossed the sill outside tail high, uninterested in my presence. I didn't try to coax it in. Some beings aren't meant to be tamed, and some homes don't require guests. My name on the mailbox, I. Walker has become natural now, no longer a statement, just a fact, a version of me not negotiated through approval. The apartment is quiet, but not vacant. The silence doesn't hum with waiting. It settles. It stretches. It holds. I unpacked the latest shipment from the museum's 17th century letters needing cataloguing. One had been pressed with a seal of lapis and gold. The paper was thin, translucent at the folds. I filed it between tissue layers, logging its origin in pencil. No ceremony, just presence. Will had written again last week. The subject line, quick signature. The body, a PDF, no greeting. A request to confirm something legal, something leftover. I hadn't opened it. I'd already said what I meant to say. Anything more would be repetition. Margot's voice lingered once in a voicemail I deleted before listening. I recognized the tone, the one she used when speaking in public, measured and sweet, like a carefully poured drink meant to impress rather than nourish. There was no place for that tone here. Not anymore. Evening came in quietly. I lit one lamp. Its shade bore a crack on the rim, something I'd meant to fix, and hadn't. I liked it that way. Dinner was simple. Lentils bred a slice of pear. No table setting, no napkin ring, just a plate and the sound of a fork resting. I placed the unused spoon beside the empty envelope from earlier. No need for another note. Before bed, I wiped the kitchen counter twice. Not from dirt. From memory. The catalogue proofs arrived just before 9. I opened them and corrected 2 captions. In the margins, I added a line about the watermark on a colonial bond. No one would notice it, except someone looking very closely. That used to bother me. Now it feels like a gift I keep for those who care to see. The scarf remained folded, the drawing untouched, the wax seal cooled beside the cup. Outside the wind shifted, not louder, not sudden, just a different kind of movement. I didn't name it. Not everything requires a name to be real. At the window I watched the iris close its petals for the night. No spotlight, no audience. Just a flower doing what it does without asking for permission. I sat down again. The chair creaked. I didn't move. One sketch lay half-finished. I didn't reach for the pencil. I didn't need to. I am not waiting for acknowledgement. I am not proving a point. I live in the quiet without apology. I exist fully without footnote, and that is enough.